So, Bucky, you believe in Google. You believe that Google answers the questions that everybody needs to answer. You really believe that, don't you? Well, would you believe that the Depression of 1930 or 29 or whatever in those days, that people were poor as church mice? Nobody had money except one group of people: bank robbers and millionaires. So, what did President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do in 1935? He put in a wealth tax. Oh my God, a wealth tax. Google it, folks. You'll see it in 1935. What was the wealth tax to do? To provide the government with operating money, because everybody was goddamn poor. Poor as church mice, starving. He did the WPA, Workers Association for the government. And but the wealth tax. It was after you made your first million, and how many people did. The next dollar going toward the second million was taxed in 1935 at 75%, or 75 cents of the next dollar after you made your first million. You now pay a tax of 75 cents and all dollars thereafter. That tax lasted until 1941. Wealth tax, they call it. And the wealthy felt it was patriotic to pay it because there was no business. People were poor, really poor, starving, bread lines, the whole thing. Even into World War II, homeless everywhere. They called them Hoovervilles, people living in shacks in midwinter and snow up to your ass. Yeah, that was 1935 to 1940, right through the war, World War II. But the tax then went up to 91% in 1941 on the second million. The second million, or the first dollar of your next million, went to 91 cents on that dollar, was taxed and went to the government. And that tax lasted from 1941 to 1960. Gee, that's a high tax to keep that time. However, we supposedly won World War II. Those of you who read a little bit, some people don't or think they do. That war was ended in 45 between two countries surrendering. One, first Germany, after being destroyed, and then second, Japan with 2 atomic bombs. That tax continued right through that time. And through that time, 2 electric grids were created. You know what electric grid is? It pays or provides electricity for 2 parts of the country. The western grid is by the Hoover Dam, which was started under Herbert Hoover, who was the president that was defeated after the crash of 1929, that was the Depression. The Hoover Dam then was finished, and electricity for the entire west side of the country was provided from that dam. Damn it. So then the eastern grid was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was created during the war and after the war. So the whole east of the Mississippi then was provided electricity and continues to provide it to this day. What else happened with that tax of 91%? Remember, that tax went to 1960. Who was president in those times? Truman, and then Eisenhower, Republican. 2 terms up for Eisenhower. 1 term for, 1.5 terms for Truman, who finished FDR's term and then had 1 more term. That tax paid for the war. And at the end of World War II, today we have the same debt we had at the end of World War II, which is a lot of debt. We're spending a lot of money for this, that, and the other thing, but nonetheless, the tax paid for it. There was a tax to pay for it then. There isn't that tax today. Just isn't. And the wealth tax is gone, and the corporate tax was taken away and given back to the corporation by the noble Mr. Trump. Anyway, that should be repealed. That tax needs to go back. But it isn't. So, but what did we do with those tax monies? We won the war with those tax monies. We built 2 electric grids with those tax monies. The other thing we did was we built the interstate highway system under Eisenhower mostly with those tax systems. The tax pays for things. And now, if you've driven in this country to an extent, you know the value of an interstate highway system and how wonderful it is to travel that way. We don't have the trains, we have cars, unending cars. But it's a good system all in all. Paid for with a wealth tax, not thin air. And that tax lasted past Eisenhower under Kennedy, who came in and dropped the tax by 10%, from 91% to 80%. But it stayed on, the wealth tax, with Kennedy getting assassinated, with LBJ continuing. The tax continued through LBJ. The interstate highway system took a while to finish it. Didn't just get done in the Eisenhower period. It lasted longer and had to be paid for with something called the wealth tax. There was also one more thing. It was called a National Infrastructure Bank, but that's an addition of investment. But I want to explain that at this time. The wealth tax continued under 8 presidents, folks. FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, LBJ, and Nixon continued it, along with Eisenhower. Republicans continued the wealth tax. Amazing. Loyalty to their country and the country's needs. Electricity is a real need. When you don't have it, it's a bitch. So see what happens when your electricity shut down and where is it being created? Here, the TVA provides most of it in this part of the country, that is Florida. Now, this government we have now would never admit to that, but that was basically a Democratic plan of electrifying the entire country. Primarily Democrats did that. A Democratic president, but Republicans supported it. And Eisenhower said the New Deal, which FDR started to do the wealth tax, he was continuing and would not hire people who didn't work to support the New Deal. This is all history, folks. Google it. You know, don't believe this character here. Google it. See if it's true or not. So here you go. Eisenhower did it. Kennedy did it. LBJ did it. Nixon did it. Ford, who followed Nixon with all his trouble, did it. And then Carter did it. So when the 1980 arrived, you would think with wealth tax continuing and all the things that still had to be done, there's to be some debt. If we had $1 trillion of debt today, people would say that's amazing, wonderful. Well, we had that when Reagan came in as the president out of California. But after wrecking California, which he did economically and with education, they went from number 2 in education to number 18. Ronald Reagan, a guy referred to as Ronald Rectum. Spells right either way you spell it. He wrecked California, and I believe he put us on a debt path that's really severe, and he did it this way. He took over from Carter. Poor Jimmy Carter, blamed for everything, and left less than $1 trillion debt. Reagan inherited that. So Reagan comes in, and he leaves $3 trillion in debt because he cut the tax from 70% to 21%. Immediately, he cut the tax. Isn't that wonderful? He cut taxes. Oh, government's bad. Yeah, until you don't have an electric grid anymore. Not so good. Try to do without electricity. Try that. You won't be able to do it, Tesla or not. Anyway, 1986, 87, America was hit with $3 trillion in debt. Remember, Reagan inherited less than $1 trillion. He left $3 trillion. That's an incompetent president. Just cut taxes, to brag that government's bad. Government's not the solution. It's the problem. That's what he said. So what do people do? Then they complain about government. they get rid of government, the service that people need, of the people, by the people, for the people. So I say, Reagan, F's the people, F the people, F the people. Thank you, folks. Nice talking. Hopefully, you know how to Google.